How are you developers? I hope you are fine. Today, being the last day of learning CSS, we'll be diving into one of the most exciting features of modern CSS, that is CSS variables. So if that sounds interesting, let's dive in. If you have been following the course, you are aware there's a repo that we forked, and we always pull the changes from it each time we have a new class so that it can be updated with the latest notes. So you can just update your branch and use the git pull command to pull the latest notes in your local machine. If you are new, I'll provide the GitHub repository link in the video description where you can just clone that repo and access today's notes. So without much ado, let's start learning about CSS variables. Once you open your VS Code and pull the changes, you'll see this new folder here, written 15. CSS variables and math functions. That is the one that we learned. That is the thing that we learned today. Inside that file, there is this readme file which contains the notes that we use in today's class. Here are the notes. So I'll just create a new file inside the folder. I'll call it index.html. Then I'll also create a new file, another file there. I'll call it style.css. That is my style sheet. Then inside the HTML, I'll use the HTML boilerplate like that. Then I'll rename the title to CSS variables like that. Then I'll provide a link to my style sheet like that. So I'll just minimize this explorer. I'll open my readme using the markdown previewer that we installed. Just click on it for it to open like that. So now I have my HTML file here, my style sheet here, and the notes opened in the markdown previewer here. So I'm ready to start today's class, and I hope you are ready too. So let's start diving in CSS variables. CSS variables, also known as CSS custom properties, enable us to define reusable values that can be used across multiple CSS rules. They are defined using the -- prefix followed by a name, and then you assign it a value. You'll see how we can do that. So just like variables in programming languages, CSS variables allow us to store and reuse values throughout our style sheet. And these powerful tools brings flexibility, efficiency, and maintainability to our web designs. So before these style sheets were introduced, there was the traditional way that we used to do things. We did things in let me show you how we did things without the variable. So let me write some code. Let me write here, create a h1. I'll say this is the traditional way. This is the traditional way of how we used to do things before the variables were introduced. So I want to write some few content. Let me create a container. Inside the container I have a h2. This is example text, something. I'm just writing random things. Let me also put the lorem ipsum there. You can say put the lorem ipsum there, the paragraph. Then also let me put something like a button. Yeah, I'll put 2 buttons. Let me put the button inside the div. I'll put another div like that. Then inside the 2 divs, inside the div I'll put 2 buttons. Like that. Maybe I'll say this one is, let's say yes, no. I've tried to create a simple thing that I'll try to style it. So I want to style this thing. This just a random things that I've written, but I want to style them. Then I want to show you the traditional way of how we used to do CSS, and this is how we have been doing it since the start of this course. But I want to change that. So let me style the body to have a light blue background color. Light blue. Let me use RGB. And no, okay, I'll say yeah, 45. Then just random values, and I'll create this color picker to change it to light blue. I think that is it. I think that is okay. Yeah, that one. This is almost aqua. Light blue is somewhere here. Light blue is that one. Let me put that color. Then I'll style the H2 that we create there. I'm using the element selectors. You can see I'm using the element selectors. I'll give it a border, just a border bottom. I just want to underline it with these 2 pixels solid. Let me give it a blue, or I'll just use the same color that I used here to underline it. Let me just copy this color for consistency. Put that color there, so that will be the underline. Then below it, let me style my container. Let me give my container also a color of that color. Then let's say what else? Let me give it a background color of white. Let me use hex code 456 like that. That is white in hex. Then let me give it also a padding of something like 20 pixels. Yeah, I think that will be fine. Then let me style my 2 buttons. I'm using the element selectors. Button like that. The button will have a background color also of white. I'll use the hex code like that. Then it will have color of that, and that this is the same color that we used here, and I'm repeating the same color. Keep that in mind. Then I'll provide a border, the same border as this H2. This button will have this. I'll copy that code and put it there because it's the same border, but this will not be bottom, it will just be border like that. Then let me put there 1 pixel for it to be a thin border. This is the width, just to remind you. Then I'll give the button a padding of something like 5 pixels. Padding of 5 pixels. So this is how we did it the traditional way. So you have seen that I have used the same color 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I have used the same color 5 times. So let us see how this will appear in the browser before you just continue. Let us see how this will look like in the browser. So if you look at that output in the browser, you can see it's just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Every text, all of it is readable, so it's just fine. So let us go. We have seen it in the browser. Let us go to the code and see what is wrong with this code. This code is just working fine, but we can improve it by using the CSS variables. So for example, let's say I want to change this color to not be a blue. Let's say this company has decided now we want to change our logo. I want the color to turn from maybe blue to something like a shade of red. So as a developer, you go to the code and change. Everywhere there's that color, you have to change a different color. So let us go to the code and see how that will be. So I've already given you the case study. You're a developer, you've developed this website. Now the owner wants to change the color from this blue to something like tomato. Tomato is a shade of red. So as a developer, you have to come to where the blue color is, remove it, then write tomato. Then come here, remove it, then write tomato. So you'll continue doing the same thing to all the places that color was used. Now in this example, you only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only have five places. But assume that you're having a big code that has over 100 places that the color was used. You can see it's tedious and hard to use, and that is where the CSS variables came in. And now let us see how we can use the CSS variables. So let me just undo this thing, leave it there it was. So for you to define a CSS variable, I've already given you a use case. Now let me show you how to do a CSS variable. There are 2 types of variables, the global and the local, but you look at that later. Let me just show you how to use the variables first, then I'll tell you the difference between the local and the global. So for you to define a variable, you define it inside the root. So you create a root selector there. Then inside that root, like you can see in the notes, where is it? It's there in the notes. You can just search for it. I think it's here. How to use? Yeah, it's here. You can define the root. Then inside the root, you can define your variable. So I can say you can just give it any name, but it has to start with those 2 dashes. So I can just say this color is, let me say it's blue. You can give it any name. You can say this is the primary color because that is the main color I'll be using in my website. So I'll call it primary color like that. Then I'll give that is the primary color. Then I'll give the value. So I'll copy this code once again. Then I'll give that value here. So now I've defined a variable and I've assigned it to a value. So if I want to use this variable, instead of writing color, then I paste the color, I can say I'll use the var function, then I'll say the var then primary color like that. So every time to use this color, I'll be copying this thing, and every time to use that color, I'll be writing var then that color like that. Var then primary color. Every time I want to use that color, I'll be writing var primary color. Where else? I think here there's another one here. Var primary color. Yeah, that way. So, and if you go to the browser, you'll see the code will just remain the same. So now if the owner decides, okay, now to change the color from this to tomato, you just change only in one place. I'll just change it here to tomato, and it will change tomato, and it will change throughout the code. So I've changed it only in one place, and it will reflect everywhere I use that value. And that is the practical example of how you can use a CSS variable. So let's go let me save this code and go to the browser and see that all the places that were blue will now be tomato. And if I need to put another color, I'll just change the value in just one place. So let's go to the browser and confirm that. So if you go to the browser, you can see that indeed all the places that were using the primary color, all of them are now tomato. So if I want to change to another color, let me inspect. I show you something. Let me inspect this code. Then I'll come here to sources. Then I'll click on my style sheet. Then I want to change it change the color in the developer options. So you can see this was our code for the CSS. It's just the same. You have seen you have defined a primary color, a variable. You can just give it any name. It's not a must you call it primary color. Just be creative and give it any name. So this can be any name, but the name that you use here, you have to put that name in all those places. But the rule is that the name should start with two dashes. So if I change this color from tomato to something like, let's say I put some green, so you can see all the places that this color was used is green. So one thing about variables, it makes our code easy to use. Yeah, easy to modify. So the code is now reusable. So this code that I put, this one line of code, I have used it everywhere. So if I change it here, it will change everywhere. That is the advantage of using the CSS variables. So let us learn the difference between the global and the local scope of the variables. So if you look at the notes, and there's this statement here, it says that CSS variables have access to the DOM, which means that you can create variables with local or global scope. You can change the variables with JavaScript and change the variables based on media queries. So this CSS variable is a whole big deal. So let's learn how you can use the local and the global scope. So for the global scope, variables are declared in the root pseudo class, and this is the root pseudo class. So this variable is a global scope variable. If any variable you put inside this root pseudo class selector, it will be a global variable. And what does the global variable mean? A global variable, I think it's here in the notes. Yeah, a global variable can be accessed and used throughout the entire style sheet. So that is so this value that is declared inside the root, you can just use it anywhere in this style sheet. You can just use it anywhere. And for you to declare a global variable, you have to put it inside the root selector. This is the root selector, the root pseudo class selector. So I said pseudo. For you to use the pseudo class, you have to put this 2 colons before the class, and that is, we learned about pseudo class selector. I'll not repeat, but this is how you write this root pseudo class selector. And any variable you define inside here, it will be a global variable. And you have looked at how you can define global variable. So now let us learn about the local variables. So local variables are declared within a specific selector. So let us do this container example. So within this selector, let's say this container selector, inside there I can declare a variable. Let me declare this variable, I'll call it white. It's so that you can just call it any name. Let me call mine white. Then I'll give it this color here. with that color. Then if I want to use this variable, I'll just use it like the usual way that you use variables. I'll use the var function. Then inside there, I'll put the white. So that is how you declare the local scope variables, and that is how you use them. But the catch of this local scope, I can't come. You can say also this has the same color as this one, but I can't come here and say var white. This one will not work. You'll go to the browser and confirm that. But the reason that this will not work is because this variable here, it's within this scope. You can just understand scope by saying you can use it only between these two curly braces. You can just use it inside here. You cannot use it outside these two curly braces, and that is what is called local scope. Local scope is you use it to have defined it. So if you define it inside here, you'll just use it inside there. You can't use it outside. So if I say the background color of the background should be white, then I'll go to the browser and confirm that the background color will not be white. But this background color of the container will be white, because we declared the local variable there and we used it in that local scope. So let's go to the browser and confirm that this one, the container will have a white background color, but the button will not have the white background color. So let's go to the browser and confirm that. So if you go to the browser, you can see that our container has this white background color, and this button, I think it didn't work in the button. Let me inspect and see what was wrong. Let me look at the style sheet here in the source, then style sheet. I think it's there. So the button, let me look at the index. So yeah, I've seen the problem. For local variables, the local variables work in where they're defined and their descendants. So we define the local variable. You can see here in the style sheet, we define the local variable. Where is it? We defined it in this container, and you can see in the HTML, this is the container. But for local variables, it works within that container and also their descendants. So anything that is inside here, this container, it can use that local variable. But if I try to style something like this h1 that is outside the container, it won't work. So instead of writing here background color white for the button, this one will work. But if I try to put the h1 to have a color of, let me use that local variable of var then white, you can see this one is not working. So the h1 is still black, but I put it to have a color of white. So it did not work because this variable is declared within the container. So this is a local scope variable. So I've said the local scope variable only works within that element and their descendant. So it will work only in this container and these other elements that are descendants of the container. But if I try to use this global variable, you have seen this global variable is here. It has color to mount. If I put that global variable here inside the h1, you can see if I write it primary color, you can see it's working. You can see that it's working because it is now the background color and the color, they have the same color, so it is not visible. But if I put other color other than that, it will not. So that is how the global variables differentiate from the local variables. I think it's clear. For global variables, you declare them in the root and you can use them anywhere inside your code. For local variables, you declare them inside any element, inside any selector, and you can only use them in that selector and the descendants of that selector. That is clear. So that is it with the CSS variables. Let's now learn about the CSS maths function. So the CSS maths function allows mathematical expression to be used as the properties. And you look at just three functions: the calc function, the max, and the min function. So to see that, let me just create another div because I don't want to mess with this one. Let me create my div. Where should I create my div? Let me create my div. Let me create it below the h1. So I'll give it a div of class. Let me call it, what should I call it? Well, let me use an ID for this one. Let me use the ID selector so that I can select it well. Let me say call it div1. That I think will, for us to differentiate it, I think we can just use the ID selector. Or let me, what shall I do? I'm thinking of how I can show this. Okay, let me just leave it that way. So I'll have an ID, a div with an ID, then I'll not that will be just an empty div. Let's go and style this div. So I'll come here, let me come and style it. Let me just style it below the button. I'll style it using, you call it div1, so I'll say div, I'll use the ID selector, say div1 like that. Then I'll give it a height and a width. So I'll give it a height of, let's say 500 pixels, then a width of also, let's say a width of 100% for it to cover the whole container, the whole of that width. Then I'll also give it a border, border 2 pixels, solid blue, like that. I think that is okay. So let's go to the browser and see how this div will be, and I'll show you how to use this calc, max and min function in the browser. If you go to the browser, you can see that this blue container here, this is the one that is our div. Let me inspect and style it a little bit. We'll go here to the index, now to the styles. What is that container? Let me give it a padding, a margin, for it to have some space, a margin of like 20 pixels. Yeah, so that you can separate a little bit from the other ones. I think that margin is fine. So yeah, so you have seen how this div is. You can see it takes the entire, you can see it takes the entire screen like that. I think my screen is a little bit zoomed. The margin is, let me just give it a margin top and bottom, because the margin, what is it called? The margin left has increased the size of that div. So let me just keep the I'll just keep margin bottom only. So instead of margin, write margin bottom, because if I put margin, it will apply margin on both sides. So let me put margin bottom. So yeah, like that, so that I can see this where I wanted to see where the container is ending. And we said that if you put margin, it affects the width. That's why I didn't put the margin. So this is our container. So our container has a width of 100%. But what if we wanted this container to have a width of 100% less, let's say 200 pixels? We don't know what percentage that is. Maybe it's wanted to come somewhere here, and here, from here is 200 pixels. I can use the calc function to do that. I can say calc. So the calc function, it's called calc, not calculate. Inside here you have to put an expression. Inside you have to put an expression, and the value of that, if I say the expression to be and the width to be 50, I can say 50 pixels plus 2. So the width will be 52 pixels. But that's not a practical way of doing it, but you have to put some space between the two values for it to work. You have to put some space like that. So if you put that expression, it will work, plus 2 pixels. That. So if you put that expression, it will work, but that's not the practical way of doing that. So I'll do it the practical way. So for example, I want the width to be 100% less 100 pixels. So I'll put that formula there. Then now you can see that, why is it not changing? I'm not sure it's not changing in the browser. Did I use something wrongly? I think I missed a semicolon, that's why it was not working. I missed that semicolon there. So I have to put that semicolon for this one to work. So you can put any expression here. So you can just any math expression. You can say I put the width to be 100% but less 100 pixels. So you can see it's 100%, but it's not reaching at 100%. Is this one, this space here is 100 pixels, and that I calculated using this formula. So you can just put, I was just showing you how you can use the 50 pixels plus 20 pixels, so the width will be 70 pixels. You can see the width is 70 pixels. But this is not a practical example of how you can do that. The most practical example, you have to do something, but you can just do any maths. But then that is most practical is just the entry to be 100%, but 100% less, let's say 200 pixels. This is what you'll see most times people writing it. So the calc function, as you have seen, it is used to write any mathematical function that you can use there, and that work will and that value that will the value of this calculation will be assigned to the width. So the calc function performs a calculation that will be used as the value of that property, and our property here is the width, and that is it with the calc. So the next one is the max. So let's look at how you can use the max function. So for max, let me just use the same div. So max function is written that way, max, then you have to put some semicolon here. So for max, you provide two values, and between the two values, the one that will be bigger is the one that will be assigned there. So if I put something like 200 pixels and let's say 500 pixels, this div will have a width of 500 pixels. That is one that will be, I think I missed the spelling here. It's 200 pixels like that, then 500 pixels. So you can see this width has a width of 500 pixels, because between 200 and 500, 500 is bigger than 200. If I put something like here 100, this div will have a width of 200 pixels, because 200 is bigger than 100. But this is not the practical example. The practical example that you can see most times is, let's say, I want the width to be either, let's say 50%, but 50% of what? Of the parent. So it will be either 50% or let's say 500 pixels. So between the two, then that is maximum will be put. So for now, 500 pixels is 50% is maximum. So you can see this is 50%. But if I try to reduce this width, so you can see the 50% is less, and this one will be 500 pixels. I also think even this one is 500 pixels. But yeah, you can see if I try to increase you can see the container is changing depending on how that is 500 pixels. So if the distance from here to here is how many pixels, let me just confirm there, because this one is 700 pixels. Here to here is 700 pixels. So 50% of 700 is 300. So between 300 and 500, which is big, it is 500. This width will be 500 pixels. But if I increase this viewport to maybe something like above 1000, you can see here the width is 1200. So between 100 and 200, 50% of 1200 is 600. So between 600 and 500, 600 is bigger. So 600 is the one that will take the size of the div, will take the size of that 600. So that is how the max works. So the one that is bigger between the two values is the one that will be placed there. And you can see that this is the most practical example. And also for min, it's just the same way. For min, just also provide two values, and this function uses the smallest value to set that value as the property of this width of that. So for example, I put here, let's say min. So between 50% and 500 pixels, usually the minimum. The minimum is 50%. That's why this one is 50%. But when I try to increase it above 50, above 1000, now the minimum will be 500 pixels. And that is how you use the min, max, and calc function. And also that is the end of today's class. But today is the end of the week, so as you know that after every week we always have our project. So let us go back to VS Code and see what is the project for this week. So as you can see let me just close this one. In this one I'm no longer using them. I have finished teaching, so now let us look at the project. You can see now the project is supposed to build a portfolio. So a portfolio is just a showcase of your skills, projects, and experiences, and you can just use it as a professional representation to market yourself to potential employers or clients, or maybe collaborators also. So you'll build a portfolio that should have these things. You'll have maybe skills, projects, and experiences. Yeah. Then your portfolio should have the following things. The main goal of this student, this is just the objective. I've just explained this one. The content, you should have a section of about me. This is what should be included in your portfolio. It should have an about me section where you just introduce yourself and tell us a brief description about you, your background, your professional journey. Then you should have a section for your skills. Tell us what skills you know, what programming languages do you know, what tools have you used, maybe VS Code, what technologies are you proficient in. That will be our own section. Then you'll have another section for projects. So you show us your projects, maybe screenshots of that project. If it's possible, you can provide videos, if it's possible, and some detailed description of what language is used in that project and things like that. You also should have a section for the experience. How long have you done things? For, let's say 3 years experience, 2 years experience. We'll put that in experience. Then you can also mention your education. That is, if you have an education background for technology, you can mention it. If you don't have, you can just say the courses you took. Let's say like this, our course, you can just mention it there for how long it was the course. And maybe if you have a certification in any other course, you can just write it there. Then you should also have a section for your contact, where you can provide your mobile number, maybe your email, and maybe you can provide how can someone reach you, things like that. Maybe your LinkedIn profile, also your GitHub, all those things that you want people to reach you through. You can mention them there. Another thing, you have to use a good design that is easy to. First, it should be visually appealing, interesting to look at, easy to navigate. You should put your nav links that a place that is easily seen, and a place where someone can just navigate through the links easily. And also, if you use clean code, and clean code, I mean indent your code well, use the best practices that we have been talking about, things like that. Then the most important thing, your project should be responsive. I have stressed about responsiveness in so long, so I think I'll not repeat myself in matters of responsiveness. Responsiveness is a must. Your website should be responsive in both mobile and laptops and desktops. All devices, your website should be responsive. So responsive is a must. And you should use HTML and CSS to build your project from scratch. You should not use any template, just build it from scratch. And you should not use any framework. Just use pure HTML and CSS. Then once you are finished doing everything, you can just deploy your project. You can just deploy it on Vercel or maybe GitHub Pages, but we recommend Vercel because we have already taught you how to deploy projects on Vercel. So yeah, that was it for this week's project, and also that is it for today's class. So see you next week. Peace out.